KUCR NAMM 2019, and we're here with Jonathan Piper, who is the curator of the Museum of Making Music that is hosted by NAMM. It's the NAMM Museum of Making Music in Carlsbad, California. And one of the things I like to say, and we're putting together kind of an extensive documentary on that place, but one of the things I like to say when I was there, it was the best of the NAMM show over the last 100 years. So if you couldn't come to the NAMM show, you could go to the museum and spend some time thinking and contemplating in relative quiet, where this is the most intense convention. I've been told this is the largest convention held at the Anaheim Convention Center every year. But by the way, so Jonathan Piper, thoughtful PhD from UC San Diego. You're here at the. What do you think of the NAMM show? I mean, it is so intense. There's so many people here, and as many times as I've been here, which is every year the last 25 years or so, probably more actually. I'm always amazed by the scale of it. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. It is the largest convention at the Anaheim Convention Center. Estimates between, I think, 100 and 120, 130,000 people over 4 days. Pretty amazing. It's really different, working in a museum and then coming up to a trade show like this, where, I can walk for miles and miles and miles.
Literally miles.
Literally miles. I still haven't been all through the show floor, and I think I've logged something like 30 miles over the last few days. So my feet are tired and I still have farther to go. So yeah, pretty different experience, museum, quiet, thoughtful, introspective. NAMM show, huge, extroverted.
I am impressed by the NAMM organization in so many ways, not only because of the museum, which preserves this, what you previously described as a quest for volume over the last century, but also I'm amazed at the quality of musical performances. Whoever is behind this and putting this together in terms of the detailed layout of where the vendors go, the manufacturers go, and the quality of the entertainment that you see, that even if you don't like the music, you have to go, that's really an excellent example of whatever that is. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The NAMM team does an incredible job of coordinating thousands of exhibitors, getting them happy in their booths, making sure that the booths all make sense, making sure that the traffic flow throughout the halls makes sense, and of course making sure that the performers make sense. And what's kind of interesting with all the stages is that, in a way, those are extensions of the show. Manufacturers are here showing off the newest thing, the best thing they've ever made, and they get to do that with those stages. So the stages aren't just rehashed technology, it's the brand new technology, so that people can hear everything in action, so that when they see a loudspeaker at a booth, they can say, okay, that looks nice, oh, but there it sounds amazing.
Everything sounds great. Even down here in the lower level, you've got a little stage here, and it sounds great. So, but anyway, let's talk about the museum. Let me get on this side of you here. And so what we have here is discs that look like they have depressions in them, and it looks like a music box. I'm going to hand you the microphone here. I usually don't want to hand it away because they never give it back, but I trust you, Jonathan. So go ahead and tell us about this.
Yeah, you know where I work. So we put together a little display here called, we're calling it Collecting Time. The idea was to take a look at some objects that have come to sort of represent time by being, in a way, stand-ins for music. So we're looking at 3 of the earliest ways that consumers and listeners would have been able to experience music without a live human present and performing. The music box, believe it or not, represents probably the earliest way that a home audience would have been able to listen to music in their homes without a performer. Music boxes, we tend to think now of little novelty toys, but down here we have a fairly early technology for interchangeable recorded music. Not recorded in the way that we think of, where you get a performance captured, but all of those little depressions on those discs are notes to be played. And so as the disc spins around, it trips little tines on a comb inside the box, and it plays the melody for you. The one up top is a cylinder player. There's a very large version of these cylinders here. Same kind of idea. All those pins will pluck the tine, and you'll get music. What's kind of cool about the box up top is that it actually has 10 different songs on the one cylinder. So it reaches the end of the song and then kind of clicks over, whole another set of tines, and clicks over, whole another set of tines. And then somebody realized that if they made them interchangeable, you could just go to the store, buy yourself a new cylinder, and bring home all those new songs. And so in a way, the object kind of comes to represent the song. And the idea that we're playing with here is, if the song takes time to listen to and experience, does the object come to represent that amount of time? That's kind of an interesting question now, but when you really think about, a time where recorded music did not exist, where we couldn't take for granted, I'll pull out my phone to listen to that new song, I'll build a playlist of all the songs I like. It was mind-blowing for people that you could, push play and, turn a crank and then push play and listen to music without somebody there making the music for you.
I have to ask, did certain discs come to be popular where people all abuzz about a certain disc? Say, have you heard the latest from? Was there that kind of culture in terms of collecting the discs, the music box discs of the day?
I mean, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that. It was, despite being this really cool new technology, it was a fairly small market. Especially the cylinder boxes, they tended to be on the more expensive side. And we don't have records. We really don't have extensive records of what was sold and what was popular.
All right. Well, were these expensive? Were these the playthings of the wealthy, the way pianos were? Was this the exotic technology of the day?
Certainly, when you have the very large sort of furniture style boxes, those were definitely on the higher end of things. The smaller disc-based boxes could have been more affordable, but again, they really didn't ever take on with a mass audience.
Let's move on down here. We have what looks like a player piano roll, and one of the ways I know it is because it looks like it, and it's also next to a sign that says player piano. Good job for putting that together. So yes, this is a player piano roll that we have cascading down the middle of the booth. I overheard somebody talking about how it looks like, they said it looks like MIDI. And that's a really great way to put it, because this was, in a sense, really early digitization of music. This an Ampico roll from the American Piano Company, which became shortened as Ampico. And Ampico also was very well known for making rolls for player pianos. When you look at all of these dots in the middle, those dots are perforations in the paper that allow a suction, allow air to be drawn in. So there's you put this roll in a player piano, there's a suction device. It would have been foot powered on early models, and then eventually it was electric, that's sucking air in, and when the air can get sucked in through one of those perforations, it triggers a note being played. So really those are all digital representations of a note on the piano being played, and then all the dots on the sides are representing things like tempo or dynamics or different controls inside the piano. The piano roll, in contrast to the music box, was incredibly popular. The devices themselves were still on the expensive side, but they were definitely more appealing to a wider population. They were also things, because a piano is fairly loud, you could put a player piano in an entertainment establishment and have a collection of rolls. Or because you can actually play a player piano as a human being playing an instrument, they were more flexible than the music box, which you can't play in the traditional sense. You have to put a disc into it. So you could buy, if you wanted to buy a piano, you buy a player piano, you can play it yourself, or you can put a roll into it. They're really interesting, I think, not only in this sense of collecting time, but when you get to the later technology of the reproducing piano, where you could actually have tempo very clearly defined in the roll itself, and you could have volume very clearly defined. You could essentially record a performance. So you could have somebody, sit down and
play, and their exact performance would be recorded in a roll, and then you can buy that roll and take it home with you and hear on your home piano exactly how a famous pianist would have played the song. And so some of the marketing actually kind of hinted at this idea of collecting the performer. There's this tagline, "The master's fingers on your piano," kind of this weird sense of bringing a piece of the human performer home with you. So in addition to the song, you're getting the player right there in your collection.
And it would be able to capture the nuances, the dynamics of the performance, everything?
Yeah, and so those were definitely more expensive devices because they were much more intricate to be able to direct the speed at which the key is depressed. The sustain pedal on the piano could be controlled by those rolls. So definitely much more involved in the technology, which made them a little bit out of reach for most people. Beyond the simpler player mechanism.
Are these rolls as important and historic as they are surviving?
The interesting thing about them is that they were commodities at the time, and so yes, they're important historically, but there are I hate to say it in a way, but there are lots of these out there. I definitely get calls about people trying to donate piano rolls, and we already have quite a number of piano rolls because again they were commodities. There are just lots of them out there.
Jonathan Piper, let's move on down here a little further. We have the technology is evolving into something that's probably more recognizable to people, and that is the phonograph.
Yeah, so the phonograph definitely feels like more of a direct predecessor of modern technology because it is actually a recording of sound, an inscription or encoding of sound into an object. And the phonograph, again, literally sound writing is what the word comes down to, or voice writing. And then gramophone, which is more the UK equivalent, is sound letters or voice letters. We probably, most people are probably familiar with the story of Thomas Edison inventing the phonograph, initially as a way to record voices, so that you could, instead of dictating to your secretary, you would dictate to your phonograph machine, and then you could listen back to yourself later. And then, of course, it became, used for recording musical performances. And it would have been initially recorded onto these wax cylinders here. This machine up in front is what Edison marketed as the shaving machine, and you would actually put a blank wax cylinder onto it, and then this was the machine that you could use to record onto your wax cylinder. The two up top are players. The one on the left is known as the Ambarola. It has a built-in loudspeaker at the bottom there, and what's actually kind of cool is that as the needle moves across the length of the cylinder, the back of the horn actually rotates along with it. So the whole thing kind of moves as you're listening to the tune. And then the one over here, probably what most people would be familiar with the big ornate horn coming off of it. And that, of course, is the early amplifier.
So it would sonically amplify through use of the horns. Thanks, I forgot. Thanks for conducting the interview. So, but this was the first quest for volume because music used to be an intimate thing. You had to be right next to the performer, and that is the case with the music box. The player piano, of course, louder piano, piano forte is loud. So that's. But this is the first time human voice is sort of published, right?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way to put it. That you're publishing the human voice, or publishing, the sound of an instrumentalist. Of course, this is a passive amplification. It's not going to be particularly loud, but certainly, I used to do that when I was in elementary school, when records were, on their way out a little bit before the current resurgence. My teacher would have us drag a needle along the surface of a record, and then tape a piece of construction paper onto that to make a really simple cone amplifier. So if you were to drag a needle or a pin across the surface of these, you would get some sound out of it. This is basically just using physical properties of that cone shape to amplify a little bit. It wasn't until much later that we had actual active amplification, but the bigger the horn, to a degree, the more amplification you get, the more you hear the low-end frequencies in particular. And then, of course, because this is such a visual and visible part of the phonograph machine, you often had these very ornate designs on them, like this beautiful floral pattern that we have.
Were these expensive in the day?
you know, they weren't necessarily cheap, but they were definitely affordable enough to become very popular very quickly.
Packaging of recorded materials has always been important, and I noticed these have a particular packaging on them. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so of course it was hugely important to be branding these, and because you had a couple of different companies competing at the same time. So the Edison records, which are what we have here, feature very high quality photo of Thomas Edison, and then the branding Edison gold molded records, and then the Edison blue amber records, and then all of them will have just a little tag on top saying what the recording is. You'll notice that most of them have some kind of handwriting on them. This was for very early personal discographies. So as you're collecting, building your own record collection, Edison and then also the music box companies would do this too. They would sell and publish catalogs, literal catalogs, where you would record down which records you have, and you could give them individual numbers or letters depending on your own personal indexing system. And then really interesting things like, the term album, which we now use to talk about a single record. That was the term that you would use when you assembled your own volumes of recordings. You'd put them all together in one physical binder, and that would be your album. Or if there was a musician who was lucky enough to be able to record multiple sides at a time and publish them all at once, they would publish them as an album of records, and that would come in a book of 4 or 5 records.
Now, you had said that you were that people were donating Ampico player piano rolls to such an extent that it's like, hold on, I've got enough player piano rolls. What about these? These are wax cylinders. Do these survive? Wouldn't they be melting in the heat? So do they last over time?
I mean, they're definitely more durable than that. They wouldn't melt until you got to a really high temperature. Certainly, the quality of the recording, because the grooves are so fine, the quality of the recording can degrade over time depending on environmental conditions. But they wouldn't just all melt. They do they can dry out and get very fragile. They're not the most durable material to begin with anyway. Wax, kind of the waxy substance, was preferable because you could just scrape the recording right into it. So obviously that means it's not going to be, I think they had a shelf life of something like, it was a specific number of times that you could play through it before you would expect it to degrade, kind of like the early version of the cassette tape that eventually wears out. But this, we're talking like you listen to it 10 times and then you hear it kind of fading out a little bit. So we don't have a huge collection of wax cylinders. We've got some, we could accept more. We're not necessarily on the lookout for them right now, but they're not quite in the same class as the piano rolls, where there are just tons of them out there.
Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Piper of the NAMM Museum of Making Music. Thank you very much for collecting time. And just coincidentally, that's the name of this show, is it?
It is. And thank you, Lewis. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Enjoying it very much. Thank you again, Jonathan Piper, Museum of Making Music in Carlsbad, California. You should go. It's really great. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.